So I'm going to talk today about a subject that's slightly counterintuitive, but at least I'm not preaching to the converted, because the question is whether the Gen Yers today care about cars, and what are the trends and what are the different things going on that are really changing the game. The great news is every time you have one of these seismic shifts, it creates new opportunities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those opportunities are for startups, for new businesses, and also for the OEMs, which is equally critical concern for them. But to give you some idea, I'm a car guy. I drive a lot of tricked out AMG Mercedes. Today's kids, today's actually Gen Yers, which we define as 16 to 34, not so much. In fact, Auto News had a recent survey, and owning a car and driving a car just under going to the dentist, okay? So pretty frightening. But that's the world that we're living in, and it's driven in part by changes that are going on in the economy, and I'm going to talk about some of the specific drivers. But also, more generally, the whole world has shifted in a couple of really important ways. Number one, brand loyalty, which used to drive connections to vehicles, now much more a situation of instant gratification. It's not like worth waiting for. Experts in the industry sort of morphing into peer commentary, peer evaluations, things like that. And the whole idea of luxury status cars and things like that is morphing into, I want more time, I want more media, I want more experiences. I'm not really into objects. I'm sort of not an owner, I'm a user. And one of the great expressions of all time is nobody ever washed a rental car. Maybe you have, but by and large, it's like they can take it back with the soda cans and the cigarettes and everything else. But the idea is really important, because today owning anything is as much perceived as a burden as it is something that's a status symbol or something that's good to do. And that's even before you get to the economics, to the idea of living in your basement, with your folks, the idea of having college debt and all these other things that are impacting the equation as well. And then here comes the web. And the web, if the cars used to represent one really important thing, it was probably independence. And today, kids feel, and the web and the connections that mobile and the web are bringing about have really changed that game as well to an amazing extent. And so it's really a situation where digital is opening the doors, and maybe a car isn't as critical. In fact, I think of a car today as a unit of transportation, and that's pretty much it. So if I can start with this idea of the emotional connections that we used to have, it honestly used to be not too long ago patriotic to own a car, and to buy Detroit and buy America and stuff like that. It was also very much an expression of our individual identities. And lastly, it was about status. And depending on the car that you owned, it was a big deal. So, see the USA in your Chevrolet, sort of, Chevy is like a rock. All these different kinds of things were things that we used to, take very personally and think were significant. Even more to the point was this idea that, driving a big car, the doctor at the end of the block was successful because every year he got a new Cadillac. And that's how people measured this stuff. Today, pretty much all gone. And that's just one. The trends just continue to sort of build on top of each other. We used to think that we actually could learn about maintaining our cars, whether it was shop, whether it was in the culture, jobs at the gas station. Honestly, it's not too many years from now that the gas stations won't even be gas stations anymore. They'll be fuel stations, but in addition, they won't have any capability to repair these new computer-controlled cars. So there are a couple of hangers-on. The West Coast and sort of certain portions of the population still regard their cars as vehicles of expression, and so that's still happening a little bit, but by and large, it's not a component of our culture today. It's also, a situation where these vehicles, if you open the hood of a car today, you might see 2 or 3 places to put some fluid, but you won't see anything like we used to understand where the mechanics, and worse, you'll probably invalidate your warranty if you're foolish enough to actually open the car and try to do anything other than changing the tires, and I'm not sure that changing the tires is that easy also. Technically, it's even more the case. As I said, garages are not going to be able to afford the multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy diagnostic systems for these cars and to really get into the control systems of the cars. You're not going to see neighborhood garages. You're not going to see all of these kinds of places, which was another place where, sort of hanging on and following the grease monkeys, we could learn a little bit about the cars and connect to the cars. So today it's big dollars, it's different people, completely different personnel requirements. It's a much higher cost for the dealer, and as the manufacturers continue to bundle service and all of these other things, it's really squeezing these guys who are sort of independent operators. So that's another thing that's going to disappear. Even more importantly, we're going to see a new group of players coming into the space. The insurance companies are already doing this, and if you haven't seen this, it's one of the most interesting things about our connected economy. And that is that you can now get a little device and you put it on your car, and basically you're trading surveillance for saving some money on your insurance. But it watches how you drive, and then they can actuarially determine whether you should pay less for your insurance. And this is just one of these sort of movements that's going to lead to more and more involvement where your insurance company now is a warranty provider, an insurance provider, perhaps your financing organization. So that may keep the OEMs honest, but we're not really sure where that's going to end up. The economics I mentioned before, fuel costs are going up, insurance, maintenance, none of these things are going in the right direction in terms of that. And as a result, we're seeing more and more alternatives. So we're seeing iGo, and we're seeing Zip cars, we're seeing shared ride programs from companies, we're seeing company provided transportation. And we're all sort of renters, we're all sort of moving to a direction where the car is a lot more of a source of indifference and a burden than it is something that we're excited about. My favorite, slogan these days is Zip car. Basically a car for people who don't want one. And they know their market, they know who they're talking to, and that's sort of the direction that this stuff is headed. Technology drivers, you can go now to the bus station, you can go to the L, you can see that public transportation is finally waking up to our mobility. And by virtue of that, we can now figure out and make public transportation much more useful and much more efficient in a variety of ways. So the technology is improving the availability and the functionality of these alternatives. And then the demographics are really frightening. Driving is down only 23, 24%, but biking is up an enormous amount, not just in Chicago, but nationwide. Walking is up as well. But amazingly enough, kids are pushing off getting their license. I mean, everybody who's over a certain age understands that the night before you were 16, it was like, I'm ready. I'll be there when they open the doors. And that whole idea is gone. That whole idea is gone to the extent that not only do a lot of Gen Yers not even have a license, but they're pushing it down so that the average age these days is probably 22 or 23 years old for kids getting a license. And it's growing, and it's growing each year. That's sort of a not so great statistic. The really frightening one is the one at the bottom, which is the number of old people on the roads is skyrocketing, okay? So if you were worried before, be really afraid. It's sort of the lady under the steering wheel. Anyway, but that's, the workforce is changing. The boomers are retiring. These are the people driving, for better or for worse. So not the greatest thing. Environmental, we want to be part of the solution. We're, sensitive to fossil fuel issues. We're sensitive to making more and more pollution all the time. Not the, happiest note in the world. So we're going to see the electric car. You'll see some great examples here at the Honda booth and some of these other places where more and more electric cars. In fact, right over there's a car that's plugged in. It's just sort of such a throwback vision of a connected car. But we're going to see this connection where our personal devices will now inform and sort of supply some of the information that's driving our connection with these cars. And then lastly, and this is sort of the last vision of President Obama, I really think in the next few years we're going to see two pretty frightening regulatory trends for young people, because used cars at least used to be the way in for young people and for low-income consumers to get transportation. We're going to see more and more pressure from the regulators to shrink the age of the fleet. And the reason for that is there's going to be more and more incentives to, one, get the polluting cars literally out of the country, send them to Mexico or Cuba, and then also to punish the gas guzzlers and the people who are driving inefficient vehicles. So the government is going to loom large. All of these trends are really changing the game. You're going to see a bunch of companies here that are sort of trying to solve aspects related to the vehicle management and the vehicle, operations systems. But there's a huge amount of other opportunities out there. It's really exciting, in fact. And so when you really, get to the bottom line, it's trying to sit down and figure out, how do I make these kids, how do I make this generation of consumers care about vehicles, care about transportation, care about these different things? And all I can tell you and leave you with is this idea, which is the car used to be sort of a empowerment vehicle. It used to be a freedom vehicle. Today, at best, it's a connection to experiences. So it's sort of a conduit. And if the manufacturers can figure out how we value that experience and how that becomes meaningful for us, then maybe there's a chance that they'll be around in a few years. Thank you very much.
So, Howard, where do you see the car industry 10 years from now? That people want to know if it's transporting.
Well, I think, when I said that I think cars will be a unit of transportation, I think that's exactly right. I think we'll be increasingly indifferent, and if anything, it'll be even less of a personal connection or an expression of our identity or anything else like that.
Okay. One of the reasons we wanted to have you here as the keynote is you actually do have a history that starts back in the auto world. People are curious about the companies that you've started, that you're part of in the past.
So within the car space, my first grown-up business was called CCC Information Services, and we provided vehicle valuation information to all of the auto insurers in the country and worked with about 10,000 dealers. The next business was a business that made about 13 million phone calls a year to consumers asking them how their service experience with their car or their purchase experience was. We expanded that into restaurants, a lot of other areas, not hotels. It turned out you don't want to be calling somebody's home and asking how their night at the hotel was, for reasons that may or may not be obvious. And then the last business was Cobalt, which we sold a couple of years ago to ADP, but we provided the e-commerce and the web sort of presence for about 14,000 dealers.
Oh, all right, so that's quite a history in the auto industry. People are curious about the comments about it being frightening looking forward. You use the word frightening a lot. I mean, do you think that's these trends are a bad thing, or are they more of an opportunity?
Well, I just think that these trends are going to drive change in Detroit in ways that I don't think they're frightening. I think they're just a situation where they can't really ignore these market shifts and these trends. I mean, if you watch the Super Bowl, you still saw, by and large, the kind of ads that would have run 10 or 20 years ago about speed and about power and sort of sex appeal, and not about intelligent transportation, not about really economy and things like that. So I think that's got to change.
As far as defining what is cool anymore, if luxury is not the cool thing anymore, can you expand a little more about
Sure.
what is cool?
We know what's cool. I mean, what's cool is to be, eco-friendly. What's cool is to be economical. What's cool is to trade, objects for experience and to trade just about anything for freedom and time. I mean, the scarcest resource we have is our time. So the luxury of all times is to be able to do whatever you please. And, a lot of people regard the car as an issue as to parking, which we'll hear much more about, an issue as to maintenance and cost. And all of those pointers are headed north. They're not being resolved. They're not being eliminated. They're not being made more economic.
Okay. Do you feel like there's a tipping point we've reached in declining car sales?
Well, I don't know that car sales will decline. I think what will happen is unit sales will continue, because one of the great things about blowing up the fleet, so there's about 117 million cars in the fleet now. We only sell, maybe this year we'll sell 18 million new cars. But as we drive those older cars off the road, the consumer the consumer that wants transportation is going to have to increasingly find a vehicle that works for them. It'll just be a lot more like a Yugo than it will be like some hot vehicle.
Okay. How do you think transportation will look in the suburbs in the future?
Well, I think the major demographic trend in the whole country is that everybody's moving to the city. So if we have suburbs in 10 years, which I'm sure we'll have a few, I think the suburbs will have to opt in favor of better systems for public transportation as well. You're just not going to have a lot of single user, moms driving the kids everywhere for the next 10 years. It's going to be inefficient, it's going to be expensive, and it's just not going to be workable.
All right. You mentioned maintenance a couple times, so do you feel like there'll be a scarcity of maintenance jobs, or how do you feel like that'll work in the future?
So, our mayor talks about, and it's absolutely right, this huge disconnect we have today between jobs that are going wanting and our ability to train the workforce to do those jobs. So as more and more maintenance becomes computer driven and becomes sort of clean tech rather than grease under your fingernails, I don't think the jobs are going to go away. They're just going to shift to a different sector. So there'll definitely be work, but you'll be doing computer diagnostics as opposed to torquing a wrench.
Okay. Do you feel like people aren't driving as much, or as far as kids? Why Gen Y is
totally.
driving much?
No, it's down, as you may have seen. I gave a talk just a few minutes ago. It's down about 23% or something.
Hold on, second half of the question.
Were you not paying attention?
The second half of the question is they're not driving as much. You feel like it's because they can't get financed?
Well, I think they're not driving as much because they can connect with their friends in new ways. They can connect, honestly, more and more. We've already moved past, simply, things like Snapfish and stuff like that. We're really on to Vine, which is video, short-term, immediate video IM communication. And so they're connected all the time. They don't have to drive to places. They don't have to spend the money. So I think there's a lot of different reasons that driving is down, including that there's a segment of these exact people that are just responsible and believe that less driving is a meaningful contribution they can make to our country.
Okay. Do you think it's going to be specific apps that you see right now? There's a Toyota back there that has Pandora, OpenTable built into it. Do you feel like that's the key to connecting with Gen Y, and that's what's going to get them to drive?
I think that thinking of the car as an entertainment center is probably sort of it'll come and go. I think much more utility is around the location of parking spaces. When you get in your car, it'll get its GPS instruction from your phone. It'll know your personal routing. It'll know the places you frequently go. All of the things that we have to sort of set up now in an independent GPS system, for example, will be morphed into the fact that we're walking around with a device that completely provides critical personal information. And that's a more meaningful experience within these cars for now. Now, when the car drives itself, it may go backwards, and it may be, if you look at Mercedes, you'll see that there's a button called video. It's not enabled in the United States, but it's not too long that your owner's manual, for example, will be something that you access through the screen in your car. I mean, that's the logical thing. Nobody actually has room in their glove compartment for the manual anyway, so it's sitting at home somewhere when you need it. But the idea is it'll soon be in the video integrated system in your car.
Obviously, currently, trucks and everything, or vans, they're designed specifically for a certain purpose, a certain job. Do you feel like the apps, the actual things they're interacting with, there's a van that'll have a software system, everything built for architects, and people are doing contracting?
If you look over at Mercedes, there's one of the, their giant vans that's all tricked out to be a complete portable kitchen with, all the cooking and all the water and everything that you need. Certainly, that's all going to be driven by a system that is an order-taking system, a quality control system, a portion control system. So for special use vehicles, I think you'll see more and more computer integration. I wouldn't call them apps because they'll be actually built into the vehicles. One of the issues is a lot of apps today are independent, and the first generation of apps was let's make them freestanding on this device. What we've discovered is we really like links. We really like the ability to go further. And so if you have a native app that isn't connected to the web these days, it's actually sort of crippled relative to all of the access to the cloud and all of the other kinds of information that we'd really like to get our hands on when we're using a typical app.
Do you feel like people are going to adopt the Google car?
Well, I think that the Google car will just be one of a number of different systems. Honestly, I'm more inclined to think that they'll take the medians and replace trains with, high-speed, large volume public transportation systems rather than still saying everybody is going to be driving a one-off car, whether the car drives itself or not. that's really not a solution, a volume or a scalable solution to what we're really talking about, which is you can't make the highways larger than a certain amount. So.
Okay. One final question here. Since you've had such a long history in the auto world, what is your next project? Does it have anything to do with the auto industry?
So actually, the next project that we're working on is trying to accurately capture your odometer information on your cars. The insurance companies can't figure out how to do it. There's a couple of apps that are sort of getting close to it. It's a hugely important thing for how your insurance is underwritten. It's a measurement of a measurement of the risk that you provide as an insured, because if you drive a lot less, and the problem is, we're all lazy, so the only place we're actually capturing it is at the dealerships. But we are building a system for all the insurance companies that would access in an accurate fashion odometer information.
All right.
Okay?
All right. Awesome.
Good.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Seth.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.